Ladies and gentlemen, when we speak of trade, we speak of trust, balance, and mutual benefit. But there are times when even long-standing economic relationships reach a breaking point. Today, I stand before you to share why I now truly understand why India made the bold decision to end its trade ties with America. When we talk about trade between two nations, fairness is the foundation. Without fairness, trade becomes exploitation dressed up as partnership. For years, India and America engaged in negotiations and agreements that were supposed to create mutual prosperity. On paper, it looked balanced. India exported textiles, pharmaceuticals, and IT services, while America exported machinery, agricultural goods, and technology. But in practice, the scales were far from even. America, with its powerful economy and global influence, often dictated the terms of trade in ways that left India at a disadvantage. One of the clearest examples of this imbalance was in tariffs and market access. While India lowered its import duties to give American goods a smooth entry into Indian markets, America maintained high tariffs on several Indian products, especially in sectors where India held a competitive edge. Indian steel, aluminum, and certain agricultural products faced heavy duties, making them far less competitive in the US market. This wasn't a one-off measure, it was a pattern. Whenever India began to find success in exporting a certain product, new barriers or regulations would emerge on the American side. Then there were the non-tariff barriers, rules and certifications that seemed designed more to delay or reject Indian goods than to genuinely protect consumers. For example, American import regulations often changed suddenly, forcing Indian exporters to retool, recertify, and spend months navigating bureaucratic hurdles. In agriculture, American sanitary and phytosanitary standards sometimes went beyond what was scientifically necessary, making it extremely difficult for Indian spices, rice, or dairy products to clear customs. The message was clear. India could open its doors wide, but America would decide when, how, and if it would reciprocate. The imbalance also showed up in subsidies. The United States has long provided massive subsidies to its agricultural and industrial sectors, allowing its producers to sell goods at artificially low prices. When these subsidized products entered Indian markets, they undercut local producers who could not compete against goods that were effectively being sold below their true cost. India's textiles and handicrafts faced a similar struggle. While Indian artisans relied on skill, tradition, and competitive pricing, American products backed by industrial-scale manufacturing and subsidies flooded certain markets, making survival difficult for small and medium Indian enterprises. Even in areas where India excelled, like IT services, the playing field wasn't level. Visa restrictions, outsourcing limitations, and sudden changes in work permit rules hindered Indian firms from fully capitalizing on their expertise in the American market. Meanwhile, American tech giants enjoyed relatively unrestricted access to India's vast consumer base, reaping billions in revenue while facing minimal constraints. Over time, these unequal terms began to feel less like oversight and more like strategy, a way to ensure that America reaped more benefits from the trade relationship while India remained dependent. The supposed partnership had become a lopsided deal where India's concessions were seen as obligations, and America's reciprocity was treated as a privilege to be granted sparingly. In such an environment, India's decision to walk away from the table was not only understandable, it was inevitable. The imbalance had gone on for too long, and self-respect demanded a change. Over time, one of the most troubling aspects of India's economic relationship with America was the gradual and almost unnoticed slide into overdependence on US imports. In the beginning, it seemed harmless, even beneficial. American products offered advanced technology, high-quality machinery, and innovative medical equipment that India's growing industries and healthcare systems needed. Consumers embraced American brands, and businesses welcomed the efficiency that came with US goods. But what began as healthy trade slowly transformed into a risky reliance that placed India's economic stability in the hands of another nation's policies and priorities. The problem with overdependence is that it reduces your options. When a country becomes heavily reliant on a single supplier for critical products, whether they be defense equipment, high-end electronics, or specialized industrial components, it also becomes vulnerable to that supplier's political decisions, economic fluctuations, and even mood swings in foreign policy. In India's case, many sectors found themselves unable to function at full capacity without a steady stream of imports from America. This wasn't just about luxury goods or consumer electronics. it extended to essential sectors such as energy, pharmaceuticals, and defense technology. Take the defense sector, for example. India had entered into multiple agreements to purchase advanced fighter jets, drones, and other military hardware from the United States. While these acquisitions modernized India's defense capabilities, they also created a dependency on American spare parts, maintenance, and software upgrades. This meant that any shift in US policy, or even a temporary diplomatic disagreement, could disrupt India's ability to keep its defense systems operational. Similar patterns emerged in technology-driven industries, where American companies supply the critical components without which Indian manufacturers simply could not produce finished goods. The situation was equally concerning in healthcare. American pharmaceutical firms supplied specialized medicines, raw materials, and diagnostic equipment that had become indispensable to Indian hospitals and research facilities. While this ensured access to cutting-edge treatments, it also meant that any delay, price hike, or export restriction from the US side could directly impact patient care in India. This was not an abstract concern. There had been instances where geopolitical tensions or trade disputes led to shortages of vital medical supplies. Even in the consumer goods sector, the dominance of American products was undeniable. From fast food chains to entertainment platforms, American companies had deeply embedded themselves in the daily lives of Indian citizens. While variety and quality are not inherently bad, the sheer scale of this presence meant that any disruption in supply or withdrawal of service could create significant economic and social ripples. Overdependence also weakened India's bargaining power. When you rely too heavily on one partner, you lose the ability to negotiate firmly because the cost of losing access becomes too high. America understood this dynamic well, and it allowed them to push for terms and conditions that further cemented their advantage in the relationship. Ultimately, India realized that economic sovereignty could not exist alongside such dependency. Diversifying import sources and developing domestic alternatives became not just an economic goal, but a national imperative. Ending trade with America was as much about breaking free from a risky reliance as it was about asserting independence. One of the most subtle yet damaging aspects of India's trade relationship with America was the way technological cooperation was handled, or rather restricted. On the surface, the United States spoke about partnership, innovation, and collaboration. There were conferences, memorandums of understanding, and public statements about building the future together. But beneath the diplomatic language, a different reality unfolded. While India opened its markets to American tech companies, America kept a firm grip on the most advanced technologies, ensuring that the flow of innovation was largely one way. India's booming IT industry, its growing manufacturing sector, and its ambitions in areas like space exploration and renewable energy all depended on access to high-quality technology. Yet, every time India sought advanced equipment, specialized software, or cutting-edge research from the United States, it encountered a wall of export controls and licensing restrictions. These were often justified under the pretext of national security or strategic sensitivity, but the result was always the same. India could buy certain products, but never the full capability to produce or improve them independently. Take defense technology as an example. While India was allowed to purchase American fighter jets or missile systems, the critical source codes, advanced materials, and production methods remained tightly guarded secrets. This forced India into a cycle of perpetual dependency, capable of operating the systems but not truly owning them. The same pattern emerged in civilian technology sectors. In renewable energy, for instance, India could import American-made solar technology, but was rarely given access to the latest cell designs or manufacturing processes that would allow Indian companies to compete globally. Software and IT infrastructure faced similar limitations. American companies dominated the Indian digital market, from cloud services to cybersecurity tools, but key elements of these platforms were black box systems, proprietary technologies that India could use but not fully understand or modify. This made it nearly impossible for Indian firms to develop equivalent alternatives or improve upon existing systems without starting entirely from scratch. Even in research collaborations, the flow of knowledge was uneven. Indian scientists often contributed valuable data, manpower, and field expertise to joint projects, but the final outcomes, patents, designs, and commercial rights, were disproportionately controlled by American institutions. This not only limited India's ability to commercialize innovations, but also stunted the growth of homegrown research ecosystems. The real cost of these restrictions was not just economic, it was strategic. Without full technological autonomy, India risked falling behind in industries that would define the future: artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, and space technology. The dependence on American approvals, licenses, and upgrades meant that India's pace of progress could be slowed or halted at the flip of a switch in Washington. Over time, it became clear that a nation cannot truly be self-reliant if it must constantly ask another country for permission to advance. America's reluctance to share critical technologies while enjoying unrestricted access to India's market revealed the asymmetry in the relationship. Ending the trade ties was, in many ways, a declaration that India would no longer accept being a consumer of technology without being a creator in equal measure. Agriculture has always been more than just an economic activity for India. It is the backbone of the nation, supporting the livelihoods of hundreds of millions and forming a deep cultural and social identity. Any disruption in this sector, therefore, is not merely a matter of trade. It touches the heart of the nation. In India's trade relationship with America, agriculture became one of the most sensitive and contentious issues, and over time, the disputes in this area became impossible to ignore. One of the main problems lay in the influx of heavily subsidized American agricultural products into Indian markets. The United States has some of the most extensive farm subsidy programs in the world, enabling its farmers to sell crops like wheat, corn, soybeans, and cotton at prices far below actual production costs. While this might seem like an economic advantage for consumers in the short term, it proved devastating for Indian farmers. Indian agriculture is largely driven by small and marginal farmers who cannot compete against artificially cheap imports. Every shipment of subsidized American grain that entered India chipped away at the market share, income, and stability of rural communities. The damage was not limited to staple crops. American dairy products, poultry, and processed foods also entered the Indian market with aggressive pricing strategies. India, with its vast population of small dairy farmers and local poultry producers, saw livelihoods threatened as these products displaced domestic offerings. The problem was exacerbated by the fact that American producers operated on an industrial scale, using technologies and economies of scale that small Indian farms could never match. What might have been healthy competition between equals was, in reality, a battle between giants and family farms, a battle in which the smaller players stood little chance. Beyond rising, there were disputes over agricultural standards and regulations. America often pressured India to relax its import restrictions on genetically modified GM crops and certain agricultural chemicals that were controversial in India due to health and environmental concerns. This put India in a difficult position. Accepting such imports risked undermining domestic food safety standards, while rejecting them often led to diplomatic friction and threats of trade retaliation. In some cases, India's refusal to open its markets to particular American agricultural products resulted in the US imposing counter tariffs on unrelated Indian exports, deepening the sense of unfairness. The cultural dimension also played a role. Food in India is deeply tied to tradition, religion, and regional identity. The aggressive push of certain American products into the Indian market was seen not only as an economic intrusion, but also as an erosion of cultural food habits. Many rural communities felt that their way of life, passed down over generations, was being priced out of existence by foreign goods that had no roots in local soil or culture. Over time, these agricultural disputes revealed a larger truth. The trade relationship was not structured to protect India's rural economy. While American agribusiness giants enjoyed open access and economic advantages, India was left to manage the fallout: displaced farmers, falling incomes, and the erosion of food sovereignty. Ending trade with America, in this light, was as much about protecting the dignity and survival of India's farmers as it was about economic fairness. It was a decision to ensure that the fields of India remained in the hands of those who tilled them, rather than being overrun by the machinery of foreign subsidies. In the world of international trade, economics and politics are never truly separate. Every shipment of goods, every signed agreement, and every tariff carries within it the shadow of political alliances and strategic interests. India's trade relationship with America was no exception. For years, the two countries positioned themselves as strategic partners, united by common democratic values and economic aspirations. Yet, beneath the warm rhetoric, their geopolitical priorities were drifting apart. These shifts, subtle at first, gradually became impossible to ignore, and they played a significant role in India's decision to sever trade ties. America's foreign policy is built on its own strategic imperatives, which often prioritize maintaining global dominance, securing energy resources, and safeguarding the interests of its allies. While these goals may seem natural from an American perspective, they sometimes clashed sharply with India's vision for its own role in the world. India's foreign policy is rooted in a mix of non-alignment, regional stability, and multipolar cooperation. It seeks partnerships that enhance sovereignty, not ones that bind it into rigid geopolitical blocs. Yet as trade deepened, America increasingly expected India to align more closely with its global agenda, particularly in areas involving military alliances, sanctions regimes, and diplomatic positions on conflicts far from India's shores. These expectations became a source of tension. For example, when India chose to maintain trade relations with certain countries that America had sanctioned, the US responded with pressure, threats of penalties, and in some cases, direct restrictions on Indian exports. The underlying message was clear. Economic access came with political strings attached. Trade was not merely about goods crossing borders, it was also about loyalty to America's strategic worldview. The shifting geopolitical climate also saw America strengthening its ties with countries whose policies often ran counter to India's interests. Whether in South Asia or the broader Indo-Pacific region, American actions sometimes undermined India's security calculations. This was particularly evident when the US engaged in arms deals or defense cooperation with nations that India regarded with suspicion. For New Delhi, it became increasingly difficult to justify deep economic integration with a partner whose security policies occasionally worked at cross purposes to its own. Moreover, as India sought to build closer ties with other emerging economies through initiatives like BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and expanded trade with African and Latin American nations, America viewed these moves with skepticism. To Washington, such diversification of alliances looked like a dilution of loyalty. To India, it was simply prudent statecraft. This difference in perspective further strained the trust that once underpinned their economic relationship. There was also the matter of public sentiment. In India, awareness was growing that economic dependence on a single powerful country made the nation vulnerable not just to market shocks, but to political coercion. People began to question whether the benefits of trade with America outweighed the loss of strategic flexibility. Ultimately, India's choice to end trade with America was not a sudden act of hostility, but a calculated response to a changing geopolitical reality. The nation recognized that economic independence is inseparable from strategic independence, and that true sovereignty means being able to engage with the world on one's own terms. Walking away from an increasingly politicized trade relationship was a step toward preserving that freedom. The decision to end trade with America was not just an act of economic recalibration, it was a declaration of intent. It was a statement that India would no longer define its prosperity through the lens of another nation's policies, priorities, and pressures. At its core, this decision reflected the philosophy of Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India. Self-reliance is not isolationism, it is the ability to stand tall in the global arena without being swayed or crippled by the actions of others. It is about creating a foundation so strong that no external shock, whether economic or political, can derail national progress. For decades, India's development had been intertwined with foreign partnerships, and in many ways, this was necessary. Access to technology, foreign investment, and global markets fueled industrial growth and brought new opportunities. But over time, it became clear that excessive dependence on a single partner, especially one as dominant as the United States, left India exposed to vulnerabilities. Self-reliance meant reducing these points of weakness, building the capacity to produce domestically, and diversifying relationships so that no one country could dictate terms. This vision called for a massive transformation across sectors. In manufacturing, it meant investing in local industries to produce goods that were once routinely imported, from advanced electronics to defense equipment. In agriculture, it meant protecting and empowering farmers so that domestic food production could meet national needs without being undercut by foreign subsidies. In technology, it meant fostering homegrown innovation, encouraging Indian startups, and ensuring that the nation did not merely consume foreign breakthroughs but created its own. Self-reliance also had a cultural and psychological dimension. For too long, there was a tendency to view foreign-made products, especially those from the West, as inherently superior. This mindset eroded confidence in domestic capabilities and stifled the ambition to build world-class Indian brands. The call for self-reliance sought to reverse this thinking, to instill pride in Indian products, skills, and traditions. It was about recognizing that the same ingenuity and resilience that had carried India through centuries of challenges could also propel it toward technological and industrial leadership. Critics argued that cutting off trade with a major partner like America might slow growth in the short term. But supporters saw it differently. They viewed it as an investment in long-term stability and independence. Short-term discomfort, they believed, was a small price to pay for the freedom to make economic decisions without external interference. The benefits of self-reliance would not come overnight, but they would be enduring. A diversified economy, secure supply chains, and the ability to chart India's future without having to ask for permission. Ending trade with America, then, was not about closing doors. It was about opening new ones. It was about building a nation capable of trading with the world on equal terms, contributing not just raw materials and labor, but ideas, innovations, and leadership. It was about ensuring that India's destiny would be written in India by Indians for Indians. That is the true essence of self-reliance, and that is why this bold step was taken